Hi Mark and Eric, thanks for submitting this piece. What I'll do is I'll go through grandfather's regretful plan first and I guess go through the corrections of the piece and also give you 5 tips to take for improvement. Then I'll also go through this second piece called Dreaming of Flying to a lesser extent. Okay, so let's start with this one here. So what I'll do is I'll read it first and then we'll go through the correction phase, and then I'll also link it back to these 5 main points and why they're really important to, I guess, improve on for the next piece. So the first one here is grandfather's regretful plan. Have you ever heard of the concept of death? The one where someone parts his or her ways due to tough circumstances. My grandfather's dying, so my plan for today is to see him for the last time. Juno lives deep in the metropolitan area with her doll family. Juno is a quirky damsel with constant tricks up her sleeves. However, today isn't a fun, exuberant day for dear old Juno. Today is the last day when Juno is able to see her grandfather in hospital. She has just received a call from the hospital saying that her grandfather has a terminal illness, and the doctors have said that today might be your grandfather's last day, the day that he dies. So today, Juno wants to see her grandfather for the last time. Juno ate her breakfast, got dressed, packed her sleeping attire, and drove off to the hospital. As soon as she got there, she immediately ran to the receptionist and asked for the direction of the ward where her grandfather is currently living in. As she approached the ward, she saw her parents both sitting on the chair across the bed, endlessly weeping. Juno sat beside her grandfather. As soon as she kissed him goodbye, he whispered a bunch of words. After that, Juno broke down in tears and held her grandfather's hand firmly. Juno felt that her grandfather was losing his grip gradually. Gasping for air, his life passing before his eyes in a series of wistful vignettes. Shocked to see that her grandfather had just passed away, Juno will never forget the final passionate words that he whispered into her ear. They were, "I love you, Juno, so very much, and I hope that you'll have beautiful children and a husband who'll care for you until you part each other's ways. Remember, Juno, I love you." Okay, let's go through the first point of this, which is structure. Structure is really important. I can see here that with this piece, you've used the structure of another piece. That's fine, but it's really important to consider the question at hand and see if it works. Some structural templates may work for another, but might not transpose easily into another piece, and this is where you have to really be careful with this. Okay, what's happened in this case is that the transfer hasn't worked very well, and I'll tell you why. So this is here what happened in this case. Here it says, have you ever heard of the concept of death, the one where someone parts his or her ways due to tough circumstances? My grandfather's dying, so my plan for today is to see him for the first time. You're speaking as a narrator. However, when you move on to the second paragraph, it says Juno lives deep in the metropolitan area with her dull family. Here you've actually transferred to narrating about yourself. So there's a disconnect, because the first time I read this, I wasn't sure who was actually speaking. So the easiest way to do this, given that you've written as a narrator, I would actually get rid of this. Okay, so let's do some track changing. Okay, I would get rid of that because it's easier to get rid of that as opposed to changing this to match the first part. Okay, so it's just a quick way of, I guess, exam strategy here. Let's keep going with structure. Juno lives deep in the metropolitan area with a doll family. That's fine. You're talking about the who, what, where in the beginning. That's great. The second question here is, what is the problem and what is the solution? So there's always an event, which a resolution happens in creative writing. So Juno ate her breakfast, got dressed, packed her sleeping attire. The event here that I see is that this is her last day to see her grandfather. And then the resolution is obviously he passes away, and that's it. So with the main event, what actually brings it up? Well, today's the last day when Juno is able to see her grandfather in hospital. That's fine, but what is the problem? Is she going to make it to see him? There's no indication of that, and it seems this section here, this third paragraph, is really eating your breakfast, got dressed, packed her sleeping, tired, drove off. Is that really necessary for the reader to know? The reader is wanting, I guess, a climatic event that resolves later on. And in reading this, I'm not getting this structure from it. You have to be clear with what your event is. So your event, I can see, is it's that, but we need to build that up within our writing. Okay. So I would actually get rid of this and replace it with something else. Let's change things now. So Juno lives deep in the metropolitan area with a doll family. Juno is a quirky damsel with constant tricks up her sleeves. However, today is a fun, exuberant day for dear old Juno. Today is the last day when Juno is able to see her grandfather in hospital. She has just received a call from the hospital saying her grandfather has a terminal illness, and the doctors have said that today might be your grandfather's last day, the day that he dies. So today, Juno wants to see her grandfather for the last time. Okay, that's fine. Let's add it to this. Juno as Juno approached the ward, she saw her parents both sitting on a chair across the bed, endlessly weeping. Juno sat beside her grandfather. Okay, we need to go beyond that, before that, and build up what the event is. Okay, so Juno wants to see her grandfather for the last time. However, the day that he dies. Cross. I would actually get rid of this. There. However, Juno was stuck at school. In Miss Judy's class. In Miss Judy's class. Miss Judy had a reputation for keeping students later past the end of the school day. She always went on and on about history. Her favourite subject. As Juno looked at the clock, sweat poured down her forehead and cheeks. Tick tock, tick tock. Time was running out. It was only 10 more minutes before visiting hours closed. Juno would have missed seeing her grandfather for the very last time. Okay, so that's what your problem is. Your problem is quite clear. Okay, Juno lives. Today isn't a fun, exuberant day. Okay, I've also gotten rid of this because you shouldn't have to say that she sees her grandfather for the last time. Um, just that, just show it through the actions. So instead of she had just received a call from the hospital, her mother received a call from the hospital this morning saying that her grandfather, well, if he had a terminal illness, he would have they would have known this a long time ago. But so her mother received a call from the hospital this morning saying that her grandfather would not make it by tomorrow as his terminal illness had run its course. Make sure you visit your grandfather after school tonight, Juno. Her mother called after her as Juno left for school. Okay, I'll get rid of this however. Juno was stuck at school, so Miss Judy's class. So then we can move on to luckily as Miss Judy was busy managing the school clown Jono, Juno, let's make it a different name, Davo, Juno saw a chance. In 1 second, she ran out the door and made her way towards the hospital. She could hear Miss Judy still screaming at Davo, so luckily Miss Judy wouldn't notice her missing. As Juno approached the ward, she saw her parents sitting across her grandfather's bed. They were both endlessly weeping. Juno sat beside her grandfather. As soon as she kissed him goodbye, he whispered into her ear. I love you, Juno, so very much, and I hope that you'll have beautiful children and a husband who will care for you until you part. Care for you. Okay, we don't need to have this section here. Remember, Juno, I love you. After that, Juno broke down in tears and held her grandfather's hand firmly. The reason why I've moved this section here down here and move this section up is because it just gives a better storyline. So after that, Juno broke down in tears and held her grandfather's hand firmly. Juno felt that her grandfather was losing his grip and gasping for air, he passed away. Shocked to see that her grandfather had just passed, I guess we don't need to write this because this is more telling. Juno will never forget. Juno would never forget the final passionate words whispered in her ear. Or even, we don't even need this. We could just write, Juno felt that her grandfather was loosening his grip and gasping for air, he passed away. And that could be your ending. Okay, let's see the final tense here. Okay, and you can see there that the number of words is actually not that much, not that much, and you can actually write that in the exam. Okay, so what we've done here is we've changed the structure of the story. We've gotten rid of something which actually added some disconnect, and we've made it more streamlined. I've moved some sections from the bottom to the top, and some from top to the bottom in this section here, just to make it flow much more easily. I've also added this section here, which is to show that there is a problem and the resolution. Okay, it needs to be quite clear what the problem is and what the resolution is, so that there is some sort of structure. Okay, structure is really important because without structure, your story has no order which the reader can follow. Okay. The second part here is tense. Keep it consistent. As I said before, what was happening in the first section was you were talking in the present tense because my grandfather's dying, and then in the second part, which is pretty much the whole of the story, you were talking in, I guess, it seemed like a different tense. So here, let's go through and correct some tense. Luna lives deep in the metropolitan area with her doll family. Juno is a quirky damsel with constant tricks up her sleeves. However, today isn't a fun, exuberant day for dear old Juno. Today was not a fun day for Juno. Her mother received a call. Okay, so you're talking in past tense now. Juno, I would actually change this into the past tense. Live deep in the metropolitan area. The language here is a bit strange. I wouldn't write deep in the metropolitan area. I'd go lived in the bustling city with her family. A quirky damsel with constant tricks up her sleeves. Juno was constantly getting told off for pulling pranks on her siblings. Okay, so there you know that she's doing tricks all the time. However, today was not a fun day. Her mother received a call from the hospital during the morning. Hospital saying that her grandfather would not make it by tomorrow, as his terminal illness had run its course. Okay, we're in past tense now. Make sure you visit your grandfather after school tonight. Juno, her mother called. Her mother said. Her mother called after her. Make sure you visit your grandfather after school tonight, Juno, as Juno left for school. As Juno left for school, her mother called after her. Make sure you visit your grandfather tonight after school tonight, Juno, Juno was stuck at school. So there you're setting up the new problem, okay? Juno was stuck at school in Miss Judy's class. Miss Judy had a reputation for keeping students past the end of the school day. She always went on and on about history, her favourite subject. As Juno looked at the clock, sweat poured down her forehead and cheeks. Tick tock, tick tock, time was running out. It was only 10 more minutes before visiting hours closed. Juno would have missed seeing her grandfather for the very last time. As Miss Judy was busy managing the school clown, Davo, Juno saw a chance. In 1 second, she ran out the door and made her way towards the hospital. She could hear Miss Judy still screaming at Davo. So luckily, Miss Judy wouldn't have noticed her missing. As Juno approached the ward, she saw her parents sitting across her grandfather's bed. They were both endlessly weeping. Juno sat beside her grandfather. As soon as she kissed him goodbye, he whispered into her ear, "I love you, Juno, so very much, and I hope that you'll have beautiful children and a husband who'll care for you. Remember, Juno, I love you." After that, Juno broke down in tears and held her grandfather's hand firmly. Juno felt that her grandfather was losing his grip, and gasping for air, he passed away. Okay, that's the end of your story, and it's very quick, and you can do it quite well in the exam. Okay, so tense, you have to be careful that you're keeping a consistent tense. So if you're doing a narration, keep it in the past tense, or if it's if you are the speaker, you should keep it in the present tense. But either way, whatever you choose, keep it consistent, because if it's not consistent, what it does is it actually disorientates the reader, so that you're not sure whether you're actually in the present or the past, and it doesn't actually create a feeling of consistency throughout the story. Okay, the third one is the emphasis on the story. Eliminate words, sentences that don't add value to your story. Think, does the reader really care about this? If this wasn't there, would the reader mind? What is really important, and this is, I guess, at a higher level, but what is important is what is not in the written piece. But it's what you've actually excluded. Okay, so a good review would always exclude things that aren't important, and that is a skill in itself. So I'll show you what we've excluded with the markups, okay, and this will give you an idea. So instead of saying deep in the metropolitan area, I've said lived in the bustling city. Okay, dull family, I don't think we need to write that down, because it doesn't really add any value. Okay, because nowhere else in the story have you mentioned about her family being dull. Instead, we emphasize that Juno is a quirky damsel by saying constantly getting told off for falling pranks on her siblings. The other section here is you've said twice that Juno wants to see her grandfather for the last time, but you've also said here might be your grandfather's last day. So a lot of repetition, we get rid of things like that. Okay, and that's part of taking things out that might not add value to the story. Another section here is Juno ate her breakfast, got dressed, packed her sleeping attire, and drove off to the hospital. Again, I don't think the reader would really care if that was in there, and if it was in there, what value would it bring to the story? Not much, you take it out. Okay, so these are the things where you need to be a bit more critical, and in doing so, you will actually write a better story. Okay? As soon as she got there, she immediately ran to the reception and asked for the direction of the ward where her grandfather is currently living. Again, this is something where, people actually presume happens already, but they don't actually need it to be told. And that's why you say here instead, as Juno approached the ward, she saw her parents sitting across her grandfather's bed. And that's the point where the reader knows, okay, you've gone through this whole thing of going to see her grandfather and all that. You're now at the ward, okay, after you've gone away from Miss Judy. Okay, the other section here is his life passing before his eyes in a series of wistful vignettes. I don't think that's necessary to put in. Shocked to see that grandfather just passed away. Again, not necessary to put that in. I guess that would be already there. And as we move this up there, we could end with the grandfather passing away. Okay, that's the emphasis on the story. We're trying to make the story more strong much more stronger through eliminating things that don't add value to the story, because the more the reader has to read things that aren't necessary, the more they'll be taken away from actually understanding what the story is about. Okay, so let's go to number 4. Find a balance with the language. Descriptive enough but not overly. Again, that's where this review is shown. The doll family could be removed, as it was, I guess, overly descriptive but not really necessary. What else? There was also gasping for hair, shocked to see her grandfather passed away. Also, this wistful vignette. I'm not sure. We try and put language in that is good, but also only if it's necessary. So we're not putting in words that sound great but don't add to the story. The main thing here is the story. Okay, so that's why I've taken these some of this word away, and we've actually taken quite a bit away, but we've also added things in, but add things in that would add to the story. Okay, last part here was checking for spelling, grammar and grammatical mistakes. You see that I've actually done that throughout the whole piece, but also I've changed the things that I've written, because in reading through it, and this happens with everyone, there are mistakes that are made, and they're small mistakes, and being able to pick those up as you go on reading through your work is really useful, because it does add a few more marks, and it shows that you actually know what's wrong and you're able to correct it. Okay, so things like you saw before, I corrected something like past and said instead to past. Okay, by correcting it, the examiner knows that you know which one is the correct one. Secondly, they know that you're actually reviewing your work, and it just shows a bit of how would you say, more attention to detail. That's what it would pay. That's what it would say. Okay, so that's the correction with that piece. I'll move on to the next piece now. But overall, this was actually quite well done overall. You do need to emphasize the structure. Structure is so important in your exam piece, because without it, you actually lose a number of marks, because it really sets the foundation. And obviously, the language needs to be honed in a bit more, and also making sure that when you do use, I guess, the template that you like for other stories, you have to make sure that you're addressing the question at hand, so that you're not simply copying, I guess, using one template as a working for all questions, because in most cases that won't work, and the story that comes out isn't as strong as it should be. Okay, so let's do the second piece here. This will be corrected to a lesser extent, but I'll emphasize main things that I've noticed. Okay, the storytelling is actually a bit better in this piece, because you've got more of a structure. What I've been focusing on in this correction is actually your language. You need to select them carefully. Simple language is okay. You don't need to use, I guess, complicated vocab, although that is great. You're trying to get to the story, and that's the most important bit. Okay, you need to again highlight the problem and then show the solution. In this story, it was clear to me what the problem was. It was that he wanted to get to know his uncle, because his uncle could make his dream come true. However, his dad was not on, I guess, had terrible relationships with his brother. However, that terrible relationship, that there should have been emphasized a bit more in the story. That was your problem. Okay, so again, I've gotten rid of this, even though Alex's father was a notorious fellow with a sense of hatred. And again, if you don't expand on it, there's no need to write on it. And if it's not part of the main story, you can get rid of it. Okay, so the terrible relationship was what you needed to focus on in this, and then obviously the resolution could be done in a lesser extent, but you would be able to see that it would be this section here, and this is actually fine. Let's go through it and let's go correct it. Okay, but they're the 3 main points here, and some of the expression is again a bit too descriptive. It sort of takes away from the story. You do want to be descriptive, but you want to find a balance, and that's the key here. Okay, so dreaming of flying. Do you see that plane over there? The one with the patchwork of extraordinary patterns? I would like for you to venture the Elysium of the sky with me. This is perfect. I really like this start. Again, but you're speaking in the first person, but then here you move on to Alex as a narrator. So you need to find a sort of link with that, okay? If you look back at the creative writing book where this structure is first used, you read it through carefully because you'll see there that he actually still talks in the first person. He doesn't actually go into a narrator voice with talking about someone else. He does talk about little stories here and there, but overall his tone is still in the first person, and that is the difference with why that the other piece in the creative writing book is a good piece, and why that structure works well there. Okay, so I would change that, and I'll let you change it. But if I was in the exam and I have limited time, I would get rid of it because it doesn't show a connection. Okay, so Alex lived with his dysfunctional family in the underbelly of the city. Alex's family dealt with various taboos and misdemeanors, such Alex such that Alex despised. There was one thing, however, that he dreamed of that would get him away from his trouble. And this is what I've done this correction beforehand: flying. Flying in the air above all else and soaring freely. Okay, so now you've established what he wants. And I've gotten rid of this section here. However, the one thing he liked and dreamt of was to fly a plane. The only person that could make this come true was his uncle. His uncle was a pilot for the prestigious airline Qantas. Okay, I got rid of this section here because it could be reworded in a different way, but there was a problem. Okay, so one day Alex asked his disdainful father for a wish. Again, I guess it's not about Alex's relationship with his father, but the father's relationship with his uncle, which would prevent Alex from achieving his dream. His father and brother fought like cat and mouse and were barely on speaking terms. Let's see, cat and dog. The wish was difficult to fill because Alex's father had a true relation with his brother, the pilot, even though Alex's father was a naughty fellow with a sin. So I've gotten rid of that. I've jumped to the action. So for 10 days on end, Alex begged his dad to speak to his uncle, and on the 11th, he gave up hope. Okay, so there it is. A few days later, as his father picked him up from school, he murmured a bundle of words to his ear. It was Alex's lucky day because today he would be flying a plane. Okay, again, just tense. A plane of power, a plane of strength, and a plane of dreams. That's fine. The two partners in crime hopped into their car. Okay, just so make sure your inverted commas are before the comma. Okay, hopped into their car and drove to the private rendezvous for planes where Alex's uncle worked. As they were, I guess, hopped into and drove to the private rendezvous for planes where Alex's uncle works. Oh, I think that's an airport. So what you'd say is instead of saying the two partners in crime hopped into their car and drove to the private rendezvous, it sounds a bit odd. I would say as the car approached the airport, Alex was mesmerized. Jumbo jets and Boeings flew in and out, soared up and down, all different colors and and sizes. They were like kites flying wherever the wind took them. Why have I added that? Well, it's more, I guess I'm using an analogy. I'm using more description by showing that they're like kites, but not only that, I'm trying to emphasize this feeling of the flying and the soaring above the winds. Okay, and this is sort of why his dream is that he wants to get away from his family. So you try and put in little elements here and there that add to that. Okay. So as they were reaching the destination, we'd go as they reached their destination. As they reached their destination, Alex started to cry. From happiness, we don't need to write that. His heart palpitating like never before because he saw his uncle preparing a plane for a test flight. Alex jumped out of the car like a raging bull and ran straight towards his uncle's plane. His uncle approached and gleefully told him, "Let's go, Alex, let's go." So Alex hopped in, fastened his seatbelt, and awaited his uncle to start the engine. His uncle sat down, assimilated his final thoughts. 3, 2, 1, blast off. I think what we do is we'd write that in words. 3, 2, 1, dot, 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 blast off, said his uncle. Okay, his uncle rather than the uncle. Said his uncle and Alex simultaneously. Instead of said, we could go blast off, chimed Alex and his uncle simultaneously. Dreaming of flying was no longer a dream for Alex. Was no longer a dream for Alex. Oops. Full stop, close. It was reality. Okay, that's a really great ending. And you can see why this dreaming of flying piece was, I guess, one step above the previous piece, was because the structure was substantially better. Obviously, what the key here is then making sure that you understand what the problem is, emphasize that problem. Okay, then you emphasize the resolution and you cut off everything in between that doesn't lead to that resolution and lead to that problem resolution. I would suggest going back through the written piece, make sure going back through the creative writing, make sure, can you actually see what the problem is and resolution is, and can you see how each piece in those books actually step towards the problem. They don't actually add anything in there which isn't relevant, unless that what they've added in there adds towards the feeling of the piece. So what you're really wanting is a really strong, concise written piece. Okay, and you can see obviously the language here is a bit better than the previous one. There is some, I guess, overuse of some description, but that's something that you can do quite easily with your review. Okay, and the ending here is much better than the previous one, so that's why this is, I guess, a much better piece. And as long as you use those, I guess, those main points, which is the structuring, so storytelling is the main thing. Get rid of anything that's not relevant, only keep relevant things. Then you need to highlight problems, show the solution, and then be aware of your language, select carefully. Simple language is okay. You can then step towards writing a more robust creative writing piece, because many of the elements are there. You've got good vocab, so it's now honing those things. Okay, and also be careful with using templates. Make sure that you consider the question at hand and write the story for that question. Okay, so I guess that's our final written piece correction, and I just wanted to wish you the best of luck for your upcoming exam very soon. And if you do have any questions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to contact me and let me know. Okay. Otherwise, good luck for your exam.